So we've got a pretty brief panel discussion, and really this is meant as an opportunity for you all to ask more questions, sort of overarching questions maybe that multiple speakers might be able to respond to. And I'm going to sort of kick it off with a question. As we saw in Abby's presentation, people come to conservation horticulture from many different backgrounds. And although many of you work across horticulture and botany, these disciplines are often quite isolated from each other, both in training at universities and also in practice. And I'm wondering what you do in your work or what you would like to see done to better unite these fields. Go ahead, Jenny. You like you have an answer.
Okay. So what I agree with you completely. I think that there's a disconnect between what the world needs and what our training provides. So if you look at traditional horticulture programs, this is not a criticism of those programs. Those programs are quite successful. They're doing very good work. But I think that we should be looking at opportunities to highlight the need for conservation horticulture and traditional horticulture training settings. What are we doing in our own institution? So we can do that through partnerships, right? We need an intern. We have an opportunity for intern. We do a transformative experiential learning opportunity at the State Botanical Garden of Georgia, where undergraduates can work with us over one semester, over multiple semesters. They can work with us in horticulture, in conservation, in education. So then there's some cross-cutting training that's going on. In one really interesting case, a student worked with conservation, worked with education, and then developed a coloring book that educated people about plants and pollinators. And then we connected her with another student, a graduate student from Family and Consumer Services, who developed a next iteration of the coloring book where we did plants, pollinators, and the food plants that those pollinators connect with, and recipes. So just sort of thinking of innovative ways to begin to make those connections with students. It's a great reason to be at a university garden. Finally, we've started field trips where our horticulture team has the opportunity to go into the field with our conservation team and do some of those types of opportunities. I think can grow this awareness of the connectivity and need for conservation horticulture.
Awesome. Any other thoughts on that? Bridging horticulture and botany? Yeah, same question. Just wondering if anyone else had some thoughts on how do we bridge horticulture and botany, both in training and in practice a little bit more.
I'll just follow up. Yeah, basically all of us are from Botanic Gardens, I guess. So we're going to have our particular way of seeing things. I'm actually new to the Botanic Garden world, just a couple of years into it, but I have fallen in love with the and what it allows, I think, is a holistic way of doing things that I do think is the answer, as some of the speakers have also, or Abby alluded to, that we certainly have a lot of strength in life sciences and plant sciences towards specialization in the world. I think there's plenty of that. And so what is some of the things that are needed? I think one of the things is actually generalism or holistic ways of working, and the garden world can contribute to that. And so a project that we're really lucky to be part of with 3 other gardens is a National Science Foundation grant for folks who have graduated college and they haven't quite entered either grad school or their professions. And it's specifically about getting a wider amount of experience. And there's one of these young scientists here, Max, who's going to present a poster. So you might get to meet one of these folks. And it's, I think, a really valuable program that was seen by the National Science Foundation is folks need a wider picture of what's out there to be able to choose careers that really fit them, but also fit the world's needs.
Absolutely. As Carlos mentioned, he mentioned an interesting historical direct connection between the cultivation and display and naming of the Victoria water lily and the funding of Royal Botanic Gardens Kew. I'd love to hear panelists' thoughts about the connection between the cultivation and display of charismatic plant species and the ability to have the resources to preserve and conserve them.
Yeah, this is a a stress that I notice always on Botanic Gardens, like one side is we need to provide a very nice display, then the academic side wants to see more papers, then the economic side wants to see more funding. And I think we need to come up with imaginative ways into these things flow together. Is interesting a little bit tying with the question from before. If you think about it, horticulture has thousands of years of existence, and conservation via horticulture is a relatively recent discipline. Earlier than maybe 1970s, there was hardly any conservation effort via horticulture, and if there was there, it was by chance because there was a plant that was looking nice. So we are just at the beginning of all of this, if that makes sense. So we need to, as I pointed out in my talk, if you have traditional horticulture collections, like maybe ferns or maybe climbers, then you have people which is a skill growing these things. And then when a conservation opportunity arises, then you have people which has the skills to grow this type of plants. So how do you coordinate people which work in very different disciplines is the challenge, really, because in a way, education relies on histories from maybe plants which have been written about in the scientific bibliography, but also you need to display the plant. So it's a very non kind of precise science, the kind of conservation by horticulture, even though it's grounded in science. And it comes with all these ramifications, no? How to get that nexus together is the challenge, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Dustin, you manage a seed collection with a conservation mission that encompasses both ex situ germplasm preservation and also in situ restoration. I'm wondering how you balance those two elements and also how your work relies on the other collections at NTPG.
Yeah, thank you. So two questions there. The first one, balancing in situ and ex situ. Yeah, and I think I tried to illustrate this point with the metaphor of the Lorax. Yes, so everything that we do in situ, everything that we do ex situ, it directly supports in situ restoration efforts. So that's kind of the whole reason that we even have seed banking, right? It allows us kind of a genetic safety net so that until the time comes where we can have appropriately managed habitat or whatever it is, that we can withdraw the seeds and use those in situ restoration projects. And then as far as the collections, we have a couple. We have our living collections, which kind of with your last question too, I think that a lot of the living collections of Botanic Gardens, they can double as both display pieces and education pieces, but also for conservation and research pieces as well. So I have a couple of grad students now who are using plants from the living collections in their research. Also, maybe even as seed orchards, which I would be fond of using living collections as seed orchards. But of course, there's also herbarium collections as well. And I showed a couple of different ways in which we've used herbarium collections in research. But also when we're seed banking, we have to make the collections to begin with, right? And so we need to be collecting herbarium voucher specimens to vouch for those seed collections as well.
I think we have a question, a virtual question.
Are quite related, so I'll ask this as a two-part question. First is, do you see any trends in preparing students to work in the field of conservation horticulture? So what skills, what trainings are available for students? And the second end, which is sort of the opposite end, is that with a large number of aging adults, how might your organization utilize volunteers in horticultural conservation?
I'll begin to address the second question first. In terms of how we use volunteers. So volunteers at our garden are used in the traditional way volunteers are used, in terms of every department manages a team of volunteers, and we couldn't do what we do without them. They're so very valuable to us. And it can be from giving tours of our conservation collections to helping in the conservation greenhouse with propagating and preparing plants for whatever project they're being grown for. So in the traditional way, we use volunteers, and in the case of the person asking the question, it begins by reaching out to the garden and asking, can I get started? And then even once you learn more about the garden, you're going to see even new ways that you as a volunteer can help. Colin talked about iNaturalist, and we're beginning to use a lot of citizen science in our work. I talked mostly about imperiled species, but our research on rare and common congeners has pointed out that we know where the rare species are because for the most part, we're tracking them. We know exactly where they are, and we know what their status is in the field. But we find it harder and harder to find common species that form the basis of a healthy ecosystem. And so we really need, at least in the southeastern United States, locally sourced native plant materials, and we need to know how to grow them too. So for us, it started actually with funding from the USDA Forest Service to begin to use iNaturalists and citizen scientists to go out and help us find common species. And it's really grown over the last 2 to 3 years. And that's the beginning of knowing where these species are. We have this whole workforce out there volunteering their time to help us find the plants we're looking for. And then other members of our conservation team download those data and begin to prioritize where we're going to do seed collecting that season, and then begin working on the permits. And so it's really become a very successful link that we're creating with volunteers in the field, and they never have to come to the garden to be a very powerful and vital part of our program. And I'm really curious to hear what this panel, Abby, you have something to add? Abby, you go. I want to hear what you have to say.
Well, this is on, can you hear me? Okay, I don't know if this is a trend or not, but I did notice through my work and the survey of conservation horticulture expertise, I was actually able to advise with some folks at Trinity College Dublin, the creation of conservation horticulture curriculum for a course within their horticulture program. And I would like that to be a trend.
Yeah.
To see more of
Let's
those.
start it now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Can I ask a
Yeah,
follow-up question?
sure.
What were the skills that would have been included in that program at Trinity College? The courses?
It was, it was growing and propagation. So some basic horticulture mixed with conservation genetics and also public outreach component as well, which was really nice. I think is also an unsung hero and important factor within conservation horticulture.
I totally agree. Can I ask?
Yeah,
add
sure.
one more. So at the State Botanical Garden, we're about 15 years into offering a certificate of native plants. And so this is for lifelong learners who want to be volunteers, or at least just learn. Maybe they're starting a second career, they're imagining a second career, or they're finding certification in their job. Maybe they're working with one of our partners like Georgia Department of Transportation or Georgia Power. And so there's it's a certificate program where you can take a series of core courses. Some of them are online, and then there's a series of electives. And some of those are online, some of those are in Georgia. So this is a great way of training that not just the next generation, but the current generation of lifelong learners into learning more about native plants.
Just picking up on a thread that you said earlier, Jenny, and just this is really for all panelists, but a lot of public gardens rely on commercial growers, especially for display plants, right, to produce the volume of plants that we need to put on display. I'm wondering how we can better utilize commercial growers for plant conservation.
Well, I think there is a few cases where we have seen this happening. Like, for example, the Wollemi pine in Australia was distributed around the world. Then there is the Brigamia insignis, which is currently being sold in Europe and being mass produced on Holland. One of the problems with this is that it collides with some principles like a commercialization of the plant with the CBD. the conversion of biological diversity. Some countries are very belligerent, if you like, on this. And for example, most of these plants I have from the Republic of Mauritius, I cannot even share it with another botanic garden, where other countries where you get these plants, they are very chill about this, and then they are happy to see this plant being commercialized as long as they can see a profit. So I guess that, for example, if you were going to do a large reforestation effort or something like this could be an avenue to follow. But there is also all these very difficult cases with specific plants where you need to be working for years or maybe trying to work out a way on making them to produce seeds. So do things like this. And I don't think commercial will be the right approach. We'll have to be more in a botanic garden setting. Because one of the problems that I see with the conservation horticulture is that you really need these very well-established, maybe state-funded botanic gardens, which you know that they are going to be sailing with this plant for many years rather than down to a small project for 3 months or for like 1 year, if that makes sense. So I guess that in the big picture, mixing all these strategies, commercial nurseries, botanic gardens and stuff is the key so that you can cover all the cases.
I mentioned briefly the idea of the Georgia Native Seed Network. And so this is an effort to increase locally sourced native plant materials. I think the first step, the first phase of this is to work with, as you mentioned, partners, agency partners who are going to be stable, big purchasers of this material. So we can work with growers, we can work with seed increase farms to make and create this stability and this guarantee that they're going to be able to sell their seed.
Mm-hmm.
And then once they've got these plants in production, these plants that support the ecosystem services of land across the country and around the world, then those growers can begin to produce extra that might be going into retail. But for the most part, nurseries work on such a thin margin that to ask them to add inventory into what they're already growing is a big ask. So that's one way. When we have a program for increasing pollinator gardens all over the state, Connect to Protect, this idea that if we can, in a small window box or a large garden, we can be creating habitat that's important for providing ecosystem services. The problem is we were asking people to do this and they asked this question, well, where do I find the plants that you are asking me to put in my garden? And one way we are addressing that is through the Georgia Pollinator Plant of the Year program. So it's sort of a gold medal program. It's a very wide net, very big tent where we invited the Georgia Green Industry Association, nursery growers. We were already working with people interested in producing plants. And we have a nomination process of 4 plants per year that can become the Georgia Pollinator Plants of the Year. So a spring grower, a spring bloomer, a summer bloomer, a fall bloomer, and then just the Georgia Native Plant of the Year. So they can be cultivars as long as they're not invasive cultivars. And so the whole goal is to increase awareness and work with growers to, and they nominate plants. They're nominating plants that they're already producing, but just are not widely available. And we think that can help bridge the gap between the native plants we need and the growers who have a business to run. So those are just a few things we're doing in Georgia.
We have another audience question here. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, this is following up directly on that, which I hadn't realized. So I actually work at a native plant nursery in Virginia. And as you know, the native plant movement has been huge, but people are very much thinking about habitat, which is great. I think the clients also might have the impression that we are increasing plant diversity, genetic diversity of plants when we put these in the landscape. It's something I think about all the time, about whether we are or aren't. And of course, sometimes they're sourced from places that grew them from seeds. Sometimes they're probably cloned widespreadly in a widespread way. And then I've sort of consulted with people, with colleagues over time, like, what do you think about this? And one colleague said that there's a guy who said cultivation alone is not conservation. And that's been sticking in my head since he said it, and it's been bugging me. So I really want to know what the panel has to think about that. And then also the nursery owner actually got really excited about NatureServe, and we downloaded all the G1s and G2s. And she wanted to encourage everyone, go out and plant these as much as you can. Well, we don't have a lot of them in the nursery anyway, but these same colleagues said, no, don't encourage people to do that at all. So I actually thought that gardeners in the audience, actually, we might enjoy some advice from y'all about how we can or can't be a part of this, and what's the effective thing to do rather than just start planting stuff and not doing the right thing. Thank you.
Yeah. So, the zoo community have been using a pedigree-based management approach for decades. Classic examples of this, there's like the black-footed ferret or the California condor. And the botanical community is just now starting to catch up. There's also this idea of meta collections, which is where you have the same species but managed over multiple different institutions. And so now you can combine these two approaches. I mentioned it in brief. Yes, and Abby actually has some brand new tools in order to facilitate this. But yes, we do need to be thinking about the underlying genetics. This Brighamia on my shirt is an example of a species that is extinct in the wild, but propagated by the tens of thousands in Europe. And so that doesn't, of course, do much for the species, but at least it will never be extinct.
Maybe I'll just chime in and say, I don't want to undermine the value of planting native plants in your landscape just as a general ecological value for pollinators, for birds, etc. So when you're dealing with rare species, genetics really is where the rubber meets the road, and it's probably the most valuable component when we're thinking about working with, say, the commercial industry that doesn't tend to use or track genetic diversity in their grows. So to me, that seems like the biggest challenge, but the commercial trade has some of the best expertise and facilities for propagating. So it seems to me like if we ever wanted to scale up to bigger sizes or to fast forward some of our propagation of rare species, they would be and are, I think there are a few examples of some commercial sites becoming really great partners. So
there definitely are examples. And then I think introducing native plants, you're doing the right thing by introducing native plants into the landscape because it's supporting ecosystem function. But I would focus on the more common things. And since you're aware of, global conservation statuses, you might be looking more at G3, G4, things that might become rare, looking for local source, looking for botanical gardens, ag extension are great partners in some of this as well too. So I think don't give up planting natives just because there's a little bit of uncertainty. The benefits outweigh the uncertainty. And then to the points that were made already, but when you get to the really rare ones, well, first of all, there's regulations around them. But also we don't want to get in the way of their conservation, but there's so much, as I mentioned, there's so much good work to be done with common species. We're losing them before our very eyes. And so the more we can get them out onto the landscape, plants will do their stuff. They'll pollinate each other. There will be establishment and selection. And so what we want to be setting up is healthy landscapes.
Another audience question here.
Yeah, hi, Jennifer. You said something about lifelong learners, and I'm thinking about my bestie's father, who is like 92 years old. He's been cultivating orchids since his 20s, so that's 70 years of orchid knowledge. I was just wondering if your gardens, this is to everybody on the stage there, have you thought about, or do you have programs for lifelong teachers, so that we don't lose that knowledge?
Volunteers.
Yeah, I was gonna say anyone can be a volunteer, and we try to match the right I mean, I love that example. I've often thought, wouldn't it be great to match lifelong gardeners with young folks who are trying to learn gardening, but don't have a garden, right? Wouldn't that be a great extension program? Yeah, match made in heaven, where you have people who physically can't do the gardening, but they have all kinds of knowledge matched with people who are just trying to learn and don't have the garden. Yes, anyone, any skill can be put to good use in a botanical garden, and then there's also plant societies, right? There is a volunteer at the Coastal Georgia Botanical Garden who is an iris expert. So I go down and met with him and, learned what he is doing. He's a volunteer, but he is cultivating their iris collections. And then our garden benefited from it because he sent me a carload of iris that he had been growing. So, I just think that there's a lot of opportunity for volunteer knowledge to contribute to what we're doing too.
Got another audience question.
I was wondering what you think about, can gardens have an effective role in maintaining diversity in natural areas in urban and, diverse urban places like Washington, D.C. or Los Angeles or Chicago?
Was that a question about what role we have in maintaining diversity?
No, I was wondering if gardens can play an effective role in maintaining biodiversity on lands they don't control, like in urban areas.
Absolutely. Just maybe you can speak. I know you were doing some work on that in San Diego.
Yeah, I suspect we have some ideas around it. Thanks for that question. So here's a vignette from Southern California. In the San Diego region, I think you could basically say that region has been built out. There's not much more areas where they're going to be developing new properties, at least around the coast. And so what's left is basically unbuildable land, which are canyons, which are a little too steep. And they do have water maybe running through, so they become valuable also for that reason. And so they're now sort of protected. A lot of different people owning those, different governments locally, and then up to the county or school districts and such. And so that is the space of opportunity in urban areas to do habitat conservation. And they're loaded with invasive species. They're degraded. They have a lot of human impact issues as well. And they're complicated areas. But I see gardens, public gardens getting into that space, including ours at the San Diego Botanic Garden. And there's a lot of folks in California that could do restoration. This is environmental restoration of those areas. But a value that we can provide is bringing in the community as well to do it, which we call community-based environmental restoration, which is engaging this incredible network of volunteers, as has been mentioned, and then also getting school children, for instance, out to plant trees and such. And so it's actually two things at once. It's enhancing the last remaining natural areas and also getting the community not only involved, but more aware about how valuable they are. So I think it's actually very symbiotic.
All right, so we are out of time. So I'm going to ask the panelists, I said brief panel discussion. I'm going to ask the panelists that are in the spirit of NPR, wait, don't tell me, right at the end of that. They always have the panelists say like one last thing. And so I'm going to ask you all to say, what is the sort of thing that you really want to get across? It's 1 or 2 sentences to this audience about conservation and horticulture and your work in that field. So basically a 30-second, not even 30, 1-2 sentences about what's the big take home that you want to give the audience from your work.
The take home message. Well, maybe it will take more than a couple of sentences, but I noticed one thing I was coming into my head was that we were mostly talking about saving species and local habitats, but if you think about it, half of the Earth surface is being either cultivated or urbanized. So basically we need to start looking into how we are going to garden this part which is no longer nature, which treats itself, if that makes sense. Like there is all these spaces which are like from public parks to gardens to crops. And I think conservation horticulture in there should have a big impact too, in the face of climate change. Aside from a tree is an asset, if that makes sense. Like how do you do conservation also by sinking carbon, enhancing people being capable of being close to biodiversity and understanding it. If that makes sense, like we have to preserve what is totally natural and manage and garden what is halfway baked between human and nature.
Yes, love that. Jenny.
My thoughts are that botanical gardens offer a remarkable space, and it's so neat to see so many gardens represented here today, offer a remarkable space and a remarkable opportunity, and there are alliances already in place. So because gardens are a place where the public comes and there's quite public acceptance of the information that museums and botanical gardens are offering. So let's lean into that. Let's lean into the fact that people love gardens and that we have an opportunity as a network to keep sharing and partnering and pushing the needle forward. Then my other take-home message, I know that was more than one sentence, is that I just, for me, in preparing for this talk and thinking about the work, we have so much to learn from how plants grow. So I really encourage us all to keep thinking about that. How do the plants grow? Don't make assumptions, because those are necessary things that we need to be thinking about in order to effectively conserve them.
Thank you, Colin.
The future food relies in part on wild plants and wild habitats. To actualize that future requires wide collaboration across very diverse fields and organizations.
Awesome. Thank you, Dustin.
Seed conservation biology is very exciting and very dynamic. Every day I'm surprised, and I love that. And we're starting to know some things about seed conservation biology now, but we really know nothing about pollen conservation by physiology specifically. And I really think that the wild species people are a little bit behind agricultural species in this, and that, yeah, pollen banking is going to become kind of the next big toolkit in the plant conservation.
Thank you. Okay, Abby, go ahead.
Thanks. I have two thoughts. One, that I saw through this survey of about, a couple hundred people who realized they were involved with conservation horticulture through this survey, that we have a communications problem. And I think we can solve it. And I think we need to talk about it more and socialize the concept. So that's one thought. And then the second one is, I think it would be really motivational for institutions, their leadership, as well as the individuals working, in those specific gardens, to connect their local activities to a global, national, or regional broader impact, to show we're in the information age, or now we're leaving it. But we have the ability to track individual efforts and see a global or a broader impact. And I think that would be really motivational for people. So.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Thank you again to the panelists and the speakers for awesome presentations today. I also want to say thank you for everyone joining us virtually, and to all of you who are here in person. Remember that the reception at the U.S. Botanic Garden starts at 6 p.m. and you will need your badge to get into the conservatory. If you do not have it, you will not be able to get in. So if you have lost it somehow in the last couple of hours, check in at the desk.